There's a moment when your life splits in two, and you don't even realize it's happening until it's already over. For me, that moment came on a Tuesday morning in February, sitting at my kitchen table in my apartment, still in my pajamas with my hair in a messy bun, eating toast and scrolling through my emails. I almost deleted it, actually. The subject line said, "Your DNA results are in," and I'd completely forgotten I'd even taken the test. My best friend had given it to me as a Christmas gift because she's obsessed with genealogy, one of those ancestry kits where you spit in a tube and mail it off to find out if you're related to Vikings or have a third cousin in Sweden. I'd done it mostly to humor her, send it off sometime in early January, and then life happened and I forgot all about it. So when I clicked on that email, I was expecting percentages: Irish, German, maybe some Scandinavian. I was expecting to find out I'm 34% this and 12% that. I was expecting fun facts to share at dinner parties. What I got instead was a detonation. My name is Sarah, I'm 23 years old, and until that Tuesday morning, I thought I knew exactly who I was. I grew up in a ranch-style house in suburban Ohio, with a swing set in the backyard and a basketball hoop over the garage. My parents, Linda and Robert, had me when they were already in their 40s. I was what everyone called their surprise baby, the late-in-life blessing that came 16 years after my brother Michael. Michael was already practically an adult when I was born, and by the time I was 7 years old, he'd moved to Seattle for college and rarely came back. We exchanged birthday cards. He sent me $50 every Christmas. We weren't close, but I never questioned it, because 16 years is a massive age gap, and some siblings just exist in different orbits. That's what I told myself anyway. That's what everyone told me. But sitting there at my kitchen table with toast crumbs on my shirt, staring at my laptop screen, I watched that entire narrative disintegrate. The DNA results showed my ancestry breakdown, sure, but it also showed relative matches. People in the database who shared my DNA. And there he was, right at the top of the list. Michael, sharing 50% of my genetic code. But the label next to his name didn't say sibling, it said parent/child. I read it 3 times. Then I Googled it. How much DNA do siblings share? 50%. Gee, how much DNA do parents and children share? 50%. The algorithm couldn't tell the difference, but it gave me the range. And parent/child sat right there in bold letters like an accusation. My hands started shaking. I put the toast down. I stared at that screen until the words stopped making sense, until they were just shapes, until my vision blurred. The man I'd called my brother for 23 years was actually my father, which meant my mother wasn't my mother, which meant my entire childhood, every memory, every family dinner, every bedtime story, every "I love you," was built on top of a lie so big, so carefully constructed, that it had its own foundation, its own architecture. 3 people had agreed to this before I was born. 3 people had decided that I would grow up not knowing. And it worked, perfectly. Now for 23 years. Until a plastic tube and a computer algorithm pulled back the curtain. I closed my laptop. I sat there in the silence of my apartment. And then I did the only thing I could think to do. I got in my car, and I drove to my mother's house. Because there was only one person who could tell me the truth now. And she was washing dishes in her kitchen, humming along to the radio, with absolutely no idea I was about to walk through her door holding a bomb. I need to tell you about my childhood first, because you have to understand what I'm losing here. You have to understand that this wasn't some broken, dysfunctional family where secrets festered in dark corners. This was love. This was stability. This was every single thing a kid is supposed to have. My mom, Linda, made pancakes every Saturday morning in the shape of Mickey Mouse. My dad, Robert, taught me how to ride a bike in the driveway when I was 6, running behind me with his hand on the seat until I was ready and he let go. We had family movie nights where we'd make popcorn on the stove and argue about whether to watch a comedy or an action film, and Dad always let Mom and me outvote him. We went to church on Sundays, not because we were particularly religious, but because it was what you did in our neighborhood. And afterward, we'd go to the diner on Main Street, where I'd order chocolate chip pancakes, and Mom would steal bites off my plate. I was a happy kid. I had friends, I played soccer, I got decent grades. I had a bedroom painted lavender with glow-in-the-dark stars on the ceiling that Dad put up when I was 8 because I was afraid of the dark. Mom volunteered at my school. Dad coached my soccer team for 3 seasons, even though he didn't know anything about soccer, and mostly just cheered really loud from the sidelines. They came to every recital, every game, every parent-teacher conference. They were present. They were mine. And yes, they were older than most of my friends' parents. Mom was 42 when I was born. Dad was 45. I got questions about it sometimes, kids asking if they were my grandparents. And it stung a little, but Mom always laughed it off. "We're just seasoned," she'd say, "like a good cast-iron skillet." They told me I was their surprise baby, their little miracle. Mom said she'd thought she was done having kids after Michael, that her body had other plans, and 16 years later, there I was. It was a good story. It made sense. It explained the age gap, the late-in-life pregnancy, why my baby photos showed parents with gray already threading through their hair. And Michael, well, Michael was just this distant figure in my childhood. A name more than a person. He sent cards. He called on holidays. He came home for Christmas twice that I remember, both times when I was really young, maybe 4 and 6. I have vague memories of a tall guy with dark hair sitting awkwardly on our couch, why smiling at me like he wasn't quite sure what to do with a small child. Then he stopped coming. Mom said he was busy building his career in Seattle, that he worked in tech and traveled a lot. Dad said some people just aren't family-oriented, that Michael had always been independent. Nobody seemed upset about it. It was just how things were. I didn't miss him because you can't miss someone who was never really there. I didn't question why my brother, who was 30 when I was 14, never invited me to visit. I didn't wonder why there were barely any photos of him in our house, why Mom's face would do this weird, tight thing whenever someone asked about him, why Dad would change the subject so smoothly you'd barely notice it was happening. Looking back now, I can see it. The careful choreography, the way certain topics were redirected, the way my origin story was told and retold until it became gospel truth. But when you're living inside it, when everyone around you is committed to the same narrative, you don't see the gaps. You don't question why your brother doesn't love you, because some brothers just don't. You don't wonder why you look nothing like either of your parents, because genetics are weird. You accept what you're told because the people telling you are the ones who kiss your forehead goodnight and make sure you have lunch money and hold your hand crossing the street. You trust them. You believe them. Because they're your parents. Except they weren't. Not in the way I thought. And that trust, that belief, that entire foundation of love and safety I'd built my life on, was about to crack wide open the moment I walked through my mother's front door with my phone in my hand and tears already burning behind my eyes. My best friend Emma gave me the DNA kit on Christmas morning. We were at her parents' house, sitting cross-legged on the floor, surrounded by wrapping paper and ribbon, drinking spiked hot chocolate that her mom pretended not to know was spiked. Emma had been on this genealogy kick for months, ever since she'd taken her own test and discovered she had relatives in Norway and a great-great-grandmother who'd been a seamstress in Dublin. She'd been talking about it non-stop, showing me family trees she'd built, distant cousins she'd connected with on Facebook, old immigration records she'd found. I thought it was kind of sweet, honestly, this obsession with roots and history. Emma's family had always been big on that stuff, the kind of people who had stories about every heirloom and knew exactly which ancestor came over on which boat. My family wasn't like that. We didn't talk much about where we came from. There were no stories about the old country, no treasured recipes passed down through generations. When I asked Mom about it once, she just shrugged and said our family wasn't big on looking backward. So when Emma handed me the box, wrapped in silver paper with a bow on top, and I opened it to find a DNA ancestry kit, I laughed. I held it up and said something like, "You're really committed to converting me to the genealogy cult, aren't you?" She grinned and told me I had to do it, that it was so cool to see where you came from, that I might have relatives I didn't know about, that the ancestry breakdown was fascinating. She made it sound like an adventure, a fun little science experiment, a way to spend a boring January evening finding out if I had Viking blood, or Italian heritage, or something interesting to mention at parties. I took it home after Christmas, and it sat on my kitchen counter for a week. Then, one night in early January, I was bored, scrolling through Netflix and not finding anything to watch, and I saw the box sitting there. I figured why not? The instructions were simple. Spit in a tube, seal it up, register it online, mail it off. The whole process took maybe 10 minutes. I registered it with my email, answered some basic questions, printed out the prepaid shipping label. The next morning, I dropped it in a mailbox on my way to work and forgot about it completely. Life just kept going. I was working as a receptionist at a dental office, saving money, trying to figure out what I wanted to do with my life. I was taking a photography class on Tuesday nights because I'd always liked taking pictures and thought maybe I could turn it into something. I was dating a guy named Chris who worked at the gym down the street. Nothing serious, just someone to get coffee with and watch movies on weekends. I was living a perfectly ordinary 23-year-old life. I went to work. I came home. I called my parents once a week. I met Emma for drinks on Fridays. January turned into February. Valentine's Day came and went. I got a promotion at work, a whole extra $1.50 an hour, and a new title that sounded more impressive than it was. Chris and I broke up amicably because neither of us was really invested. Emma started dating someone new and couldn't stop talking about him. The DNA test never crossed my mind. Not once. I didn't check my email hoping for results. I didn't think about ancestry or heritage or relatives. It had been a fun little activity on a boring night, something I'd done to humor my best friend, and then I'd moved on. I had no idea that somewhere in a lab, technicians were processing my sample. I had no idea that my genetic code was being sequenced, analyzed, compared against millions of others in a database. I had no idea that an algorithm was making connections, drawing lines, identifying relationships. I had no idea that the results sitting in my inbox on that Tuesday morning in February would answer questions I'd never thought to ask and raise new ones I'd spend months trying to untangle. All I knew was that I was eating toast, checking my email before work, and there it was. Your DNA results are in. I clicked it thinking I'd find out what percentage Irish I was. I clicked it thinking I'd have something interesting to tell Emma over drinks that weekend. I clicked it like it was nothing, like it was just another email, like my entire understanding of who I was wasn't about to shatter into pieces so small I'd never be able to put them back together the same way. The email opened with a cheerful banner. Bright colors, friendly fonts, an animated graphic showing a spinning globe. Discover your story, it said across the top. And below that, my ancestry breakdown displayed in a neat pie chart. 34% Irish, 28% German, 19% English, 12% Scandinavian, 7% broadly Northwestern European. I remember feeling a little thrill looking at it, thinking how Emma would be excited that I had Irish heritage like her great-great-grandmother, how I could tell my mom we had Scandinavian blood, and maybe that explained why I liked the cold. Stupid, mundane thoughts. Happy thoughts. I scrolled down past the Ancestry map, showing little pins in Ireland and Germany and Sweden. There was a section about traits, telling me I probably didn't have dimples and was likely lactose tolerant and had a higher chance of hating cilantro. I smiled at that because I actually do hate cilantro, and it felt validating somehow, like science was confirming my lived experience. Then I scrolled further, past the health predispositions I'd opted out of seeing because I didn't want to know if I was at risk for Alzheimer's or breast cancer. And that's when I hit the relative matches section. You have 1,847 relatives in our database, it announced proudly. Here are your closest matches. The first entry stopped me cold. Michael Thompson, close family match, shared DNA, 49.8%. Confidence, extremely high. And below that, in smaller text, predicted relationship, parent/child. I stared at it. I read it again. Parent/child. Not sibling, not brother. Parent. I felt something shift in my chest, like the floor had tilted just slightly, but enough to throw off my balance. There had to be a mistake. I clicked on the little information icon next to the relationship prediction. A pop-up explained that people who share approximately 50% of their DNA are either full siblings or parent-child pairs, and the algorithm uses additional markers to predict which relationship is more likely. It was predicting parent-child with extremely high confidence. My hands were shaking. I grabbed my phone and Googled, how much DNA do siblings share? Like I was back in high school trying to cheat on a biology test. 50%. Full siblings share about 50%. Then I Googled, how much DNA do parents and children share? And got the same answer, 50%. The numbers were the same, but the algorithm had made a choice. It had looked at whatever markers distinguish siblings from parent-child, and it had chosen parent-child. I went back to the results page and stared at Michael's name like if I looked at it long enough, it would rearrange itself into something that made sense. Michael Thompson, my brother. Except the computer was telling me he wasn't my brother at all. He was my father, which meant the math I'd never bothered to do before suddenly mattered. Michael was 16 years older than me. 16, which meant when I was born, he was 16 years old. A kid. A high school student. I opened a new tab and started Googling things I didn't want to Google. Can DNA tests be wrong about relationships? Rarely, in cases of identical twins or very specific genetic anomalies. DNA test says brother is father. I found forums, Reddit threads, people sharing stories eerily similar to what I was looking at on my screen. Stories about family secrets, about children raised by grandparents, about lies that lasted decades until a DNA test told the truth. My toast sat forgotten on the plate, cold now. My coffee went cold too. I don't know how long I sat there, clicking through tabs, reading articles about DNA testing accuracy, staring at Michael's name on that screen. The apartment was silent except for the hum of my laptop and the sound of my own breathing, which had gone shallow and rapid like I'd just run a marathon. Linda and Robert had me when they were in their 40s. That's what they'd always said. Their surprise baby. Their late-in-life blessing. But what if Linda hadn't given birth to me at all? What if she'd raised me, loved me, tucked me in at night, but I hadn't come from her body? What if I'd come from someone else, someone young, someone whose baby Michael had been responsible for at 16, and Linda had stepped in and made a choice. A choice to raise her grandchild as her own daughter, a choice to let her teenage son walk away and build a life, a choice to construct a story so complete, so airtight, that I'd believed it for 23 years without a single question. I closed my laptop. I sat there in my kitchen with the morning light coming through the window, everything looking exactly as it had 10 minutes ago, except nothing was the same. The coffee maker on the counter, the plant Emma had given me that I kept forgetting to water, the calendar on the wall with my work schedule written in blue pen, all of it exactly where it had been. But I felt like I was looking at my life through glass now, like I was separate from it, like I'd stepped outside my own body and was watching someone else sit at this table having the worst morning of their life. I picked up my phone. I called in sick to work, my voice sounding strange and distant to my own ears. Then I grabbed my keys, got in my car, and started driving to my mother's house because there was only one person who could tell me if what I was thinking was true. And if it was true, I needed to hear her say it. I needed to watch her face when I asked the question. I needed to know if the woman who'd raised me, who I'd trusted more than anyone in the world, could look me in the eye and finally tell me the truth. The drive to my mother's house took 17 minutes, but I don't remember any of it. I don't remember getting on the highway, or taking the exit, or turning onto her street. I just remember suddenly being parked in her driveway, staring at the house I'd grown up in, the house where I'd learned to walk and lost my first tooth and had my high school graduation party in the backyard. The garage door was open, and I could see Dad's car was gone, which meant he was probably at his Wednesday morning golf game with his retired buddies. Just Mom home, just the two of us. I sat in my car for a minute, trying to figure out what I was going to say, how I was going to ask the question, but there was no good way to do this. No script for, "Are you actually my grandmother, and has my entire life been a lie?" So I just got out, walked up to the front door, and let myself in with the key I'd had since I was 12. I could hear the radio playing in the kitchen, some oldies station Mom always listened to while she did housework. I found her at the sink washing dishes from breakfast, wearing jeans and an old Ohio State sweatshirt, her reading glasses pushed up on top of her head. She was humming along to the music. She looked so normal, so completely herself, so much like my mom, that for a second I thought maybe I'd gotten it wrong. Maybe the DNA test had made a mistake. Maybe there was some other explanation. Then she turned and saw me and smiled, and I held up my phone with the DNA results still pulled up on the screen, and I watched her face do something I'd never seen before. The color drained out of it, like someone had pulled a plug. Her smile didn't fade. It just collapsed, like the muscles in her face had forgotten how to hold it. She looked at the phone, then at me, then back at the phone. Her mouth opened, but nothing came out. I don't even remember what I said. Something like, "I need you to explain this," or "Tell me what this means." But my voice sounded wrong, too high and tight, and about to break. She reached for the counter like she needed to steady herself. Then she pulled out one of the kitchen chairs and sat down hard, and her hands started shaking. That's when I knew. Before she said a single word, I knew. If there had been any other explanation, any innocent reason why Michael showed up as my father on a DNA test, she would have said it. She would have laughed it off, or looked confused, or suggested the test was wrong. But she didn't do any of those things. So she just sat there with her hands shaking, and her face gone pale, and her eyes filling with tears. And she looked at me like I was holding a gun instead of a phone. The radio kept playing in the background, some song from the 70s about love and summer. The faucet was still running in the sink. Outside, a neighbor's dog was barking. And in that kitchen, where she'd made me thousands of meals, where she'd packed my school lunches and taught me how to make her famous chocolate chip cookies, and sat with me doing homework at this exact table, my mother started to cry. Not quiet tears. Deep, wrenching sobs that came from somewhere so far down, I didn't know a person could make sounds like that. She put her face in her hands, and her whole body shook with it, and I just stood there holding my phone, watching the woman who'd raised me fall apart. When she finally looked up, her face was red and wet and completely destroyed, and she said, "I'm so sorry," in a voice I'd never heard before, small and broken and terrified. And then she said, "Michael is your father." And even though I'd already known, even though that's why I'd driven over here, hearing her say it out loud made something crack inside my chest. She kept talking through the tears, words tumbling out like they'd been trapped for 23 years. Michael had gotten a girl pregnant when he was 16, a girl from school whose family moved away before anyone knew about the baby. The girl didn't want to keep it, didn't want Michael involved, but Linda couldn't stand the thought of her grandchild going to strangers. So she made a choice. She took me. She raised me as her own. She told everyone she was pregnant, wore maternity clothes, moved to a new church across town where nobody knew their family history. She erased the truth and built a new one. Robert had agreed to it. Michael had agreed to it. Everyone had agreed that this was the kindest thing, the best thing, the only thing that made sense. Michael was 16. He had his whole life ahead of him. He couldn't be a father, but Linda could be a mother. Again. One more time. And I would never have to know. I would never have to grow up as the kid whose teenage father didn't want him, whose mother gave him away. I would just be loved. Just be wanted. Just be Sarah, the surprise baby, the happy ending. Or except now I was standing in her kitchen, and the happy ending was in pieces on the floor between us, and she was looking at me like she didn't know whether I was going to forgive her or walk out the door and never come back. And the worst part, the part that made my chest feel like it was caving in, was that I didn't know either. We sat at that kitchen table for hours. Mom made tea that neither of us drank. She kept apologizing, kept crying, kept reaching for my hand, and then pulling back like she wasn't sure if she was allowed to touch me anymore. And slowly, in pieces, the whole story came out. Michael had been 16, a junior in high school, when he got a girl named Rachel pregnant. Rachel was 17, a senior, planning to go to college in California. They'd been dating for 3 months, the kind of high school relationship that feels important at the time, but probably wouldn't have lasted past graduation anyway. When she found out she was pregnant, her parents wanted her to get an abortion. Rachel didn't want that, but she also didn't want to keep the baby. She had plans, scholarships, a future that didn't include being a teenage mother in Ohio. Her family decided she'd finish school, have the baby, give it up for adoption, and then move to California like nothing had happened. That's what people did back then, Mom said. You hid the pregnancy, you had the baby quietly, you gave it away, you moved on. Michael had been terrified, completely out of his depth, a kid himself trying to process the fact that he was about to be a father. Mom said she watched her son fall apart that summer, watched him try to figure out how to be responsible for another human life when he still needed her to do his laundry and remind him to study for tests. That's when she made the offer. She'd take the baby. She'd raise me. Michael could finish high school, go to college, build the life he was supposed to have. Rachel's family agreed immediately, sort of relieved to have a solution that didn't involve strangers or paperwork or their daughter's name attached to an adoption record. And Michael, scared and 16 and desperate for someone to tell him what to do, he agreed too. Mom explained that she'd always wanted more children, but hadn't been able to have them after Michael. She'd had miscarriages, years of trying, the kind of grief that settles into your bones and becomes part of you. So when this happened, when her teenage son got a girl pregnant and the baby needed a home. It felt like fate, like the universe was giving her one more chance at motherhood. She convinced herself she was saving everyone, saving me from foster care or growing up knowing I wasn't wanted, saving Rachel from having to be a mother at 17, saving Michael from throwing away his future, and giving herself the daughter she'd always dreamed of having. Robert had been skeptical at first. He'd wanted to tell the truth, to raise me as their grandchild, to let Michael be involved as a young father with support. But Mom had been adamant. She'd researched it, talked to lawyers, figured out how to make it legal and official. Rachel signed away her rights. Michael was listed as the father on the original birth certificate, but then there was a closed adoption, paperwork that sealed those records, and a new birth certificate issued with Linda and Robert listed as my parents. By the time I was born, the story was already set. Linda was my mother. Robert was my father. Michael was my brother who'd left for college. And Rachel was just gone, moved to California, disappeared from all of our lives like she'd never existed. See, Mom said they told Michael to stay away, that it would be easier for everyone if he built his life somewhere else, if he didn't confuse me by being around. The plan was that maybe when I was older, when I was an adult, they'd tell me the truth. But years went by, and it never felt like the right time. When I was 5, 10, 15, 20, there was never a moment where telling me seemed like it would do more good than harm. So the lie just continued. It calcified. It became our reality. Michael had tried to come home those first few years. He'd visited when I was little, but Mom said it was too hard for him. He'd look at me and see this life he could have had. This daughter he was supposed to pretend was his sister, so he stopped coming. He built a career in Seattle, got married, had 2 kids of his own. He sent cards and money because that's what brothers do. And maybe it was easier to play the role from 2,000 miles away than to sit in our living room and maintain the fiction face to face. And Robert, the man I called Dad, who had no biological connection to me at all, he just loved me. Mom's voice broke when she talked about him. She said he'd chosen me every single day. Chosen to be my father when he could have walked away, when he could have said this wasn't his problem, this wasn't his grandchild. But he'd held me in the hospital the day I was born, and he'd decided that biology didn't matter. I was his daughter. Period. She looked at me across that table, with her eyes red and swollen, and said, "I know what we did was wrong. I know lying to you for 23 years is unforgivable. But Sarah, every single day of your life, you have been wanted, you have been loved. That was never a lie. I didn't yell. I didn't throw anything or slam doors or tell her I hated her. I think part of me wanted to rage and scream and break something because maybe that would make the pain in my chest feel more manageable. But instead, I just sat there feeling numb, like my body had hit some kind of circuit breaker and shut down all the feelings because there were too many of them trying to happen at once. I asked her about Rachel. I needed to know about the woman who'd actually given birth to me, the person whose DNA I carried, whose face might look like mine. Mom didn't know much. Rachel had been a quiet girl, good student, played violin in the school orchestra. She'd moved to California for college, and Mom had lost track of her after that. Didn't know if she'd gotten married, if she'd had other children, if she ever thought about the baby she'd given away. Mom said Rachel had held me once in the hospital, just once, and then asked them to take me away because it was too hard. Then she'd signed the papers and left, and that was it. My biological mother was essentially a ghost, a name and a few details and nothing else. No photos, no letters, no way to find her even if I wanted to. And I didn't know if I wanted to. I didn't know what I wanted at all. I looked at my mom, this woman who'd raised me, who'd wiped my tears and celebrated my victories and been there for every single moment of my life. And I couldn't reconcile her with the person who'd lied to me for 23 years. Both versions were true. She loved me, and she'd deceived me. She'd protected me, and she'd stolen my right to know my own story. She was my mother and my grandmother, and apparently those two things could exist simultaneously, and I was supposed to figure out how to hold that contradiction in my head without losing my mind. I thought about Michael, my brother who wasn't my brother, my father who'd never been my father. He'd been 16, a kid, told to stay away, to let someone else raise his daughter, to send birthday cards and pretend that was enough. I'd spent my whole life thinking he just didn't care about me, that I had a brother who couldn't be bothered to know me. But really, I'd had a father who'd been erased from my life before it even started. A father who'd chosen distance because that's what everyone told him was right. And I thought about Dad, Robert, the man who'd coached my soccer team and taught me to ride a bike and walked me down the aisle at my high school graduation mock ceremony. He had no biological connection to me at all. I wasn't his granddaughter or his daughter by blood. I was his wife's grandchild, his son's mistake, a baby that had complicated their retirement plans. And he'd chosen me anyway. He'd shown up every single day. He'd been my father in every way that actually mattered, and he'd done it knowing the truth the whole time. The irony wasn't lost on me. The person with no blood ties had been the real parent. The person who was biologically my father had been absent. And the woman sitting across from me crying had loved me fiercely while lying to my face every single day. I stood up from the table. Mom looked panicked, asked where I was going, reached for me again. I told her I needed time. I needed to think. I needed to not be in this kitchen where everything looked the same, but nothing was. She asked me not to hate her. She asked me to understand that she'd done what she thought was best. She asked me if I could ever forgive her. I didn't have an answer. I walked out of that house and got in my car and drove home, and then I sat on my couch in my apartment and stared at the wall for hours. I didn't cry. I didn't call anyone. I just sat there trying to figure out who I was, now that everything I'd thought I knew about myself had been revealed as fiction. Was I still Sarah? Was I still the same person I'd been yesterday morning when I'd woken up and eaten toast and thought my biggest problem was whether to take the early or late shift at work? My memories were all the same. My childhood hadn't been erased, but it had been recontextualized, and I didn't know how to reconcile the past I remembered with the truth I now knew. Every "I love you" from my mother was real and also part of a performance. Every birthday, every holiday, every ordinary Tuesday had been built on top of a massive lie. And the worst part was that I understood why they'd done it. I could see the logic. I could trace the decision tree that had led to this moment. A scared 16-year-old boy. A 17-year-old girl who didn't want to be a mother. A woman who desperately wanted another child. A man who chose to love someone who wasn't his blood. They'd all made choices that probably felt right at the time, that felt like love, that felt like protection. But those choices had taken away mine. They decided who I would be before I was old enough to have a say. And now I was 23 years old, trying to figure out how to be a person whose entire origin story had just been revealed as carefully constructed fiction. It's been 4 months since that Tuesday morning. 4 months of therapy, of long conversations with Emma, who held me while I cried, of slowly, carefully rebuilding some kind of relationship with my parents. Because that's what they are, I've decided. My parents. Not biologically, or not in the way I thought, but in every way that's ever actually mattered. I talk to Mom twice a week now. It's stilted sometimes, awkward, like we're both learning how to be honest with each other for the first time. She doesn't hide behind the story anymore. When I ask questions about Michael or Rachel, or what it was like raising someone else's child, while pretending it was hers. She answers, "It's painful and messy. And sometimes I have to hang up because it's too much. But we're trying." Dad doesn't know that I know yet. Mom wants to tell him together. Wants us all to sit down and have the conversation. But I'm not ready for that. I'm not ready to watch him realize that I know he chose me when he didn't have to. That might break me in a different way. I haven't contacted Michael. I don't know if I will. He made his choice 23 years ago when he agreed to this arrangement, and he's made it again every year since by staying away. Maybe one day I'll want to know him, want to understand his side of it. But right now, I'm still trying to understand my own side. Here's what I know. The lie was wrong. The deception was a betrayal. I lost 23 years of knowing my own truth, and that's something I'll probably always grieve. But I also know that I was loved, genuinely, fiercely, completely loved, by two people who showed up every single day. Robert isn't my biological father, but he's my dad in every way that word has ever meant anything. And Linda isn't my biological mother, but she's the one who raised me, who taught me how to be a person, who loved me like I was hers because she decided I was. Blood doesn't make a family. I learned that the hard way. What makes a family is choice. It's showing up. It's staying when things get complicated. It's love that persists even when the truth comes out and threatens to destroy everything. My life isn't the story I thought it was. But maybe the story I thought it was isn't less real just because the details were wrong. The love was real. The memories are real. And I'm still Sarah, still me, still trying to figure out who that is, just with a more complicated origin story than most people get.
If you watched this story to the end and you enjoyed it, give us a like, subscribe, and share it with your friends. My name is Mr. Mike, and I write and produce fictional stories like this to entertain you. Every story will be read in the voice of the gender that tells it. See you next time.